Hello and welcome to the Everything's Black and White podcast with me, Newcastle United editor Aaron Stokes, and we're here this afternoon to talk about Tino Livramento, the young Southampton right back, who we believe Newcastle United is very, very close to getting over the line. Now, we're recording this episode about 10 to 4 on Friday afternoon. As far as we're aware, Livramento is still a Southampton player, but we're expecting movement on the next couple of days for him joining Newcastle United. Now, Newcastle have chased this player all summer. They've made no bones about their interest in the young Southampton player, who is very, very highly rated after his exploits on the South Coast and when he was in Chelsea's academy. They've previously had two offers rebuffed for Livramento. Southampton have so far stuck to their guns, but we learned on Thursday afternoon that a fee had been agreed for the player after Southampton finally gave in to those demands. Now, Southampton have remained firm all summer. They value this player at about £40 million. And there's a lot of reasons for that, not only because of, how talented he is, not only because they're trying to, sort of recoup a lot of money after going down, but also because Chelsea, when they sold this player to Southampton back in 2021 for just £4 million, they included a lot of clauses in that deal, including a buyback clause that could be activated after a year, and also a sell-on clause, which means anything of the profit that Southampton get, Chelsea get a very big chunk of it. Now, that's obviously had a knock-on effect. Newcastle United have in turn had to, maybe pay a bit more than they wanted to, given that Southampton were trying to squeeze every single penny out of them for this deal. We understand that the deal is around 30 million. It will increase should certain add-ons be met. A couple of those add-ons are to do with Newcastle's campaign in the Champions League. But ultimately, Southampton are probably just going to get slightly less than that £40 million valuation that they have sought earlier this summer. Chelsea, as I've mentioned, had that sell-on clause, and as Southampton's profit went up, Chelsea technically were going to earn more of that profit due to the clause that they included. We're understanding that they are expected to pocket north of £10 million of the transfer fee, which isn't too bad for them, considering they also sold him just 2 years ago for just a handful of million. Now, why did Newcastle United want him? We've heard a lot of fans talking this summer about who they want to bring in, a new centre-back, a new left-back, and very few people had another right-back on their list. Now, you've got to remember that they had Howson Ashby on the books, who was joined Swansea City earlier today on loan. He was very, very impressive during pre-season, and a lot of people thought he would get a chance to show what he could do behind Kieran Trippier this summer. Then you've got Javier Manquillo, who hasn't played the last couple of games. He's trying to overcome a few niggly injuries, but we're expecting his long-term future to be away from Newcastle United. And then you've got Emil Kraft, who is sort of at a bit of a crossroads of his Newcastle United career. He had a really unfortunate ACL injury last year when he was really playing really well for Eddie Howe, and he was one of the standout performers whenever he filled in for trips. He's still trying to overcome that knee injury. We haven't so far seen him in pre-season, even though he's back training with the first team. And as soon as Ashby went out the door, you sort of understood that, okay, they're going to definitely get a right back in, because now they're starting to look really short, even though, as I said, not many people thought this was a priority position before the summer window opened. But ultimately, Newcastle United believe they are getting the long-term heir to Kieran Trippier in this deal. You've got to remember that when Livramento burst onto the scene through Chelsea's academy, he was seen as, the next best thing at right back for England, never mind just at club level. Gareth Southgate has spoken very highly of him. He had a fantastic, half a season at Southampton before that cruel injury, which kept him out for over a year between 2022 and 2023. But ultimately, if you can get him back anywhere near what he was like at Chelsea and in the early days of Southampton, I think 30 million with slightly few, a little bit of added extra, I think you're getting a really, really good deal. He's only 20 years of age. He's still got, bundles of time ahead of him. He's quick. He can get forwards. He's athletic. The only real question mark people have got about him is he going to be able to overcome this injury, and such a cruel injury as well, at the age of 20. Now, he did come back and play the final couple of games of Southampton's campaign. He did also suffer a bit of a hamstring setback back in December, which sort of delayed his return to football. But he played the last couple of games of Southampton's Premier League season when they got relegated. And look, he looked just as sharp as he was during his early days at St Mary's. Newcastle United, and Eddie Howe's touched on this in his press conference this morning, they are going to have assurances from the medical team that he's overcome that issue that kept him out for, roughly 380 days. They're going to have to do their checks to make sure that, they aren't buying a crock here, because it would be a very, very expensive mistake if they were to find out that actually, Livramento is going to really, really struggle with injuries down the line. But you only have to look at Callum Wilson, who suffered 2 separate ACL injuries a couple of years apart, and he was still banging the goals in for fun last year. So I think you've got to give Livramento time. And as I said earlier in this video, if you can get him back to anywhere near what he was like when he first burst through the ranks at Chelsea, I think you've got a really, really good player on your hands. Now, Newcastle have done quite well, I think, in the transfer window. I think if they can get Livramento over the line and have him, Sandro Tonali and Harvey Barnes all through the door before that Aston Villa game next week, I think, you can't really grumble at the transfer business. But there's certainly scope to do a little bit more. And Eddie Howe was asked this morning at the press conference. We, the media, asked Eddie Howe, how many more do you think are you going to get through the door? You've only really got, about 3 weeks, 3 and a bit weeks to get your business done. And Howe, as ever, straight about the question, he wouldn't really be drawn on Livramento, but he did say that he wanted, 2 more players in. And I think that will potentially include Livramento. Now, if you're only going to bring in 1 more player, what position do you strengthen? Now, for me, I think they've bolstered the attack perfectly with Barnes. I think he's the ideal replacement for Alan St-Maximin. I think he will perfectly suit Eddie Howe's style, whereas there was always lingering doubts as to whether Maxi was sort of being shackled a little bit in Howe's system. I think they've done really well to bring in a player like Sandro Tonali, who, if he can get up to speed with the English game quickly after leaving Italy, I think Newcastle have got one of the steals of the summer, given on his performances at the San Siro over the years. And also, without even, strengthening too much more in midfield, the emergence of Elliot Anderson, who's had a fantastic pre-season, the emergence of Louis Miley, who continues to surprise everyone in the middle of the park. You look at that middle of the park now, and you've got, as I've mentioned, Tonali, Miley, Anderson, on top of Joelinton, Willock and Longstaff, who are both to come back from injury, Bruno. The possibilities are absolutely endless. So for me, I think Eddie Howe will probably feel the same. I think defence needs to be the next priority. I think there's questions now as to whether Newcastle go out and get the left back that they've been searching for all summer. If you ask the majority of fans before the summer window, who they wanted to bring in, I think a lot of them would have said that a left back should be very, very high on the priority list. As of yet, it hasn't happened. They've been linked with a number of players in that position, the likes of Kieran Tierney, Lewis Hall and Mark Cucurella, both from Chelsea, Anthony Robertson from Fulham, before he signed a new deal there. Theo Hernandez at AC Milan, who would probably top Sandro Tonali as being, the signing of the summer if Newcastle were to splash out on him. And then you move, into the heart of the defence, and there's still people saying, well, should we go out and try and find the long-term successor for Fabian Schär? You've got Botman there, who's only 23, and he's going to have a long career ahead of him, hopefully in black and white. Fabian Schär, he's proven that he's no slouch even in his 30s. But there's just that lingering question as to whether Newcastle United have enough depth at centre-back. And I think Schär, Botman, Lascelles, should he stay, and Dan Burn, plus the emergence of Alex Murphy, that's 5 decent options you've got. You then include the likes of Remy Savage, who also played his part during pre-season. But I think there's the appetite there to maybe go and get a ball-playing defender. They've been heavily linked with Joachim Andersen from Crystal Palace, who has a lot of similar traits to Fabian Schär. You've also got his partner, Mark Gahey, who would be a fantastic addition if they could persuade Crystal Palace to sell. You go further afield, you've got Sporting Lisbon's Gonzalo Ignacio, who is, only 21, but he's really proven to be one of Europe's, hottest prospects this summer. So I think the opinion's probably split among fan base. Do you go out and get a new central defender, or do we go out and get a new left back? I think, Dan Burn did such an excellent job out on the flanks last year, but with Jamal Lewis leaving, with Paul Dummerton's or with Matt Targett, struggling to sort of find his best form that we saw when he joined in January of 2022. There's an argument to be made that I think a new left back, a first choice left back who, comes in and really gives Dan Burn a challenge for that starting role. You're looking at that, plus the 3 they've brought in, and you're thinking that is a really, really good window for Newcastle United. They've obviously sold out to maximum. We're expecting movement in the next couple of weeks on Ryan Fraser, Isaac Hayden, Jeff Hendrick, and Goran Kowal, who is also going to go out on loan in the next couple of days. It's not a bad window for Newcastle if that all comes to fruition. I think Eddie Howe knows that he probably does need one more in defence. Where it is, that's ultimately up to him. But I think Newcastle United have had a good window so far. And if they can get Livramento over the line, and if he can, prove that he still has that form in him that he had before that injury, I think Newcastle are getting one of the deals of the summer. And I think potentially if Eddie Howe can get him back to his best, there's no question that he becomes, a candidate to play at a major tournament for England in that right back position. It's a bit of a risk, it's a bit of a gamble, but on the surface, I think most fans and me personally, I'm very, very happy to see a deal for Livramento struck. I think it shows the type of business that they're trying to do. Yes, the right back wasn't the priority, but they saw a deal that they can do, and they've went for it. And credit to both Newcastle and Southampton, because we've seen a lot of Championship clubs over the years completely roll over and say, look, we're resigned to losing our best players once we get relegated from the Premier League. But Southampton have stuck to their guns with Tino Livramento. They've also stuck heavily to their guns with Romeo Lavia, who was also linked with Newcastle. They've turned down 2 bids from Liverpool for him. They're asking for a lot of money for their captain, James Ward-Prowse. Carlos Alcaraz isn't going to go cheap if he leaves either. So credit to Southampton, but also credit to Newcastle United to not being dismayed by missing out twice and making sure they get the deal done at the 3rd time. As I say, we're recording this Friday afternoon. We're expecting movement over the weekend. We're expecting Livramento on Tyneside in the next couple of hours for his medical. Hopefully they'll be able to get a deal done before the weekend, ideally before that Sunday game in the Cellar Cup. But, that might be cutting it a bit fine. But ultimately, Newcastle United are signing a fantastic young right back who could be the future once Kieran Trippier leaves down the line. Thanks very much for joining us on this special episode of the Everything's Black Mike podcast. We'll be back over the weekend with some reaction to those Cellar Cup games, and also myself and Andrew Musgrove will be back for the Monday show as per usual in the studio then. Thanks very much for listening. We'll see you very soon.